Welcome to The Impact Equation, conversations with leaders shaping a brighter future, with me, Adam Pike.
And me, Rafi Adelstone. With our special guests, we unlock the secrets of those who dare to transform our world. We talk to architects of change, pioneers in their fields, working towards a brighter future for us all. In each episode, we dig into each element of the impact equation. On today's episode, we're joined by Dan Garrett, Chief Growth Officer at Dignity Group, which acquired Dan's company, Farewill. Dan started Farewill in 2015 with his friend Tom, with a mission to change the way the world deals with death. Under his leadership, Farewill became an award-winning provider of wills, probate and funerals, raising over £1.1 billion in pledged legacy income for more than 1,000 charities across the UK. Now, by partnering with Dignity, he's scaling that vision further, transforming an industry that touches us all.
In this conversation, we explore how to tackle complex, deeply human challenges with design-led thinking, why legacy matters, and the bold moves needed to change society's relationship with death. Dan, welcome.
Oh, what a great intro. That was incredible. I'm really spinning the CV pretty hard there. Thank you.
So Dan, really interested in what it is about your early life and upbringing that led you to become the master of death.
Oh, great. What an incredible title. I guess, it's always nice to give a really consistent answer here about something that happened to me as a kid. And I wish I had something that was sort of clearer. There are two things I think were very formative. One was my grandpa dying when I was probably like 11 or 12 or something. He was just a fantastic guy. And seeing how difficult that was for my mum. Like, my mum is a kind of incredibly emotionally wise, switched on person, always knows what to do in every situation. And I think seeing her struggle with that, despite still being a great parent and everything else, was just really formative time for me to be like, wow, this is terrible. We're all going to lose parents and partners and best friends, and this really does hit you like a ton of bricks. And then I think the second part of it for me was I went to the Royal College of Art and did a master's degree in design, and for quite a bit of that, I was based in Tokyo working in geriatric care. So I kind of saw firsthand, we had this amazing team of designers and researchers and ethnographers. And I feel like we missed the point when we were in that environment. We really focused on the physical side of aging rather than the fact that everyone's terrified of dying. No one has any idea what to do with it. And I just thought, what an interesting area to look into. It's a huge consumer industry in the UK. And I would say it's probably the one that has been least impacted, not just by technology, but by any kind of customer centricity, at least until we got started. If you imagine your local high street funeral director, it looks like something often from 100 years ago. And there's a real kind of modernizing drive at the moment that I think is fantastic and ultimately helps people to deal with that process of grieving.
How did you end up in Japan? Why Japan?
So I did this course at the Royal College of Art. It was called Global Innovation Design, and it was split between New York, Tokyo, and London. So it was kind of part of my master's degree. It was unbelievable. So fantastic and an incredible place to be.
And was the point of the course to come up with ideas to sort of build businesses around?
Pretty much, yeah. I think the RCA, if I'm sure someone could call in and correct you here, but I think the RCA starts more businesses than any other university in the UK, including Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, despite having a far smaller headcount. So it's partly because it's postgraduate, but I really wanted to learn, having done an engineering degree before, I wanted to learn how to actually make things. And it's an amazing, best design university in the world because it is quite practical. So this was the first year of this course. There was 12 of us who were on it. The caliber of the other people was absolutely extraordinary. And you basically, whether it's a week or 6 weeks at a time, we're doing these projects of, can we build something in a particular area that actually really makes a difference to people? So I think by the time I left the course, I'd started like 5 companies or something. And one of them is, a different one is still going today as well.
So tell us a bit more about, Dan, what that experience taught you. If we can dig a little deeper in terms of that RCA experience.
Yeah. So the first thing it taught me was just how unbelievably fun it is to be young and abroad. And I had a scholarship to be there. So I was I had enough money to have fun. And the first 6 months was in New York. It was literally just the funnest thing in the whole world. So not that I needed to learn how to have fun, but it was incredibly fun. And the second thing was when I came back to London to do the second year, I was put in a project group with 3 other people who were still really close friends of mine. And they were all absolutely extraordinary at what they did. I remember we were working on a project to do with the British Paralympic team, and it was essentially like designing equipment for the British Paralympic team. And until then, it was like, university, you kind of like have fun, mess around a bit. And the caliber of all of these people was just completely not like anyone that I'd worked with before. Within a week or something, we'd built this like fully functional prototype. We got something patented. We then won the UK like Dyson award for it. We had the British wheelchair basketball team using the equipment in the competition. We were on BBC News. We were on loads of different things. And it was like, that was a 3-week project. I think the biggest thing it taught me is how to get stuff done quickly. I think that's just the most useful skill you can ever have, is like the ability to get something done and to understand that you can basically always do something faster if you've got the right alignment, you have the right people in the team, and you know how to cut corners appropriately. And that, I think, that then went on to inform wanting to run a business is just I love building things. That's a thread that goes, I just want to build things, and I want to build them now, and I have no patience. And it was my first experience of working with other people who had absolutely no patience and were desperate to bring good creative work into being.
So bring us into that geriatric nursing home in Tokyo. What was happening that really inspired you to think about death? Who did you meet? What were they saying to you? And then how quickly did it come to the fore as like this idea for Farewill? What was the sort of relationship between the two?
Well, they were saying a lot of stuff to me, but it was in Japanese, so I can't say that I did the like absolute highest quality user research of my life. But the thing that really stood out to me is I did a kind of dissertation about dementia care, and read a lot about it. And there's kind of really different models of dementia care around the world, and the one that they did really well in Japan is basically, there were provably better outcomes for someone's experience of early stages of dementia and late stages of dementia, where you have this kind of very person-centered care. So, for instance, if someone's been a concert pianist, then everyone throughout their experience of dementia carries on reinforcing the fact that they have an identity that isn't just like having a terrible time and being in a geriatric facility. So there's this kind of like individuality of how people experience dementia, and your top goal as someone supporting someone as a family member or in a care setting is like the preservation of the self. And so I found that just really inspiring, and moving, and seeing the standard of care in that facility was just like nothing I'd ever seen in the UK, frankly. The bit that was constantly missing was it was sort of notable by its absence, was that nobody was really talking about the fact that, you're 97 and you're in a care facility. Like, how much longer is this going to go on for? So I actually thought the really interesting bit was how do you have productive conversations about the fact that someone's going to die? Can those be helpful for your family who you leave behind, and for you as you go through that process? So I think it was almost kind of notable by admission. And then when I went back to the UK, I spent a couple of months in the death industry. So I started just mystery shopping funeral directors. The first one I went to, which was fantastic, was W English around the corner, which is a Dignity funeral home. So now it's all a circular journey for me. So it was the
circle of life.
Yeah, the circle of death. It was the first one I went to, and now that's part of the branch network. So I still mystery shop funeral directors all the time. I got qualification in will writing. I started filing friends who'd lost grandparents, started helping them to do probate applications, and just thought, this is an amazing opportunity. It's this huge consumer industry that like I mentioned before, is just really at that point had gone through very little modernization. So
then where did the idea come from?
The idea came from, which is a really unglamorous answer to the question. So I started it with two friends at the RCA, who both now are co-founders of other businesses as well, Anton Peña and Corrado Kayanaku. And we literally sat in a room thinking of an idea, because at the RCA we were doing a group project and we had to come up with an idea. So it's quite a funny answer to the question of like, it wasn't exactly like a lightning bolt moment. It was like we sat in a room and we thought of ideas, and then we thought of this idea, and then we did it.
And how long did it take between having the idea and doing it?
5 seconds. Yeah. I think when you've got a good idea and you just crack on. If I started a neobank, I can't imagine how hard that is. Look at the caliber of people running them. I watched listened to a podcast from Nick Stavronski the other day. I'm not getting into a knife fight with Nick Stavronski. I'll be dead. So I think there's something that I like about it, which is this mix of, just a market that was in real need of TLC. And also the lack of competition is a great advantage when you're starting a business. It's actually there are a few more people who've started what's referred to as death tech businesses nowadays, but I didn't have the skills or experience to go head to head with someone running a neobank. Whereas actually, me and a couple of friends and some other really smart, talented people could build something really novel and inventive in the kind of initially what was the will space, because there was nothing else out there that was any good. So the first thing we did for the final show at the Royal College of Art, which is 80,000 people come to it, it's quite big, was we built this really well-designed platform for making your will. We made a slimmed down version of it. You could literally do it in a minute. And that just really took off. We had people like James Dyson and like Tim Brown from IDEO, a bunch of other people use it. And that's actually where we raised our first round of funding from, is kind of meeting some angels at that point.
And Dan, as a user of the product, and I think one of your chief referrers.
Yeah, I think you referred me.
You're welcome, both of you. What struck me at the outset was how much design played a part and language played a part in the people's experience of the product. It was integral to the business that you built. What's your philosophy around incorporating design into a product like that?
The reason why design is so important is any friction in that process is going to mean you don't win a customer. Like if someone has the tiny bit of motivation to make their will after putting it off for 7 years, and they're sitting at their computer on a Sunday thinking, I'm going to finally get this sorted, then our job is to get all barriers out of their way that we can. And you do that by reducing the cognitive load of understanding questions that we're asking, not using like terrible legalese if you don't have to. And like, it's like a lot of web businesses. It's basically, how do you design great forms? It isn't always glamorous and about brand and those sorts of things. It's how do you make something actually really, really kind of delicately and exquisitely put together, because you're managing someone else's time and motivation, and they kind of can't be asked. So that's why I'd say it's such an important design-led business. Is it's helping someone get from A to B when they really don't have the motivation to do it.
I'd love to get into the weeds of how you built the business and the mechanics, because lots of people are interested in how you grew it to be the dominant force that it was. But just a final question on this part, which is, when you reflect back, are there any personal stories or customer stories that sort of stand out to you that make all of that hard work worthwhile?
Oh, there's millions of them. I mean, you've already mentioned the charity side of it, but I'm sure we'll come on to talk about that more. But there's been a phenomenal amount of money left to charities, which is quite a nice achievement. Then, I remember early on in the business, one of the things that we experimented with was not just getting people to complete the process, and it was like, revenue metrics and new customers. It was, can we get people to emotionally engage in the process? So can we get people to leave messages to their loved ones when they're going through it? And I was a bit skeptical about if we could do it, but actually we went from 1% of customers doing it, which is the industry standard, to 80% of our customers writing the most amazing things inside their wills. I can pull up a couple of my favorite examples because I store them all. And I've got the permission to share these before anyone listening thinks, if I make a will, I'm going to give away your deepest, darkest secrets. So the way that it works, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes online. And then somebody checks through your will. So we have these kind of like legal specialists, and they check through the will, supervised by a solicitor. And what it means is, for probably the first few years of the business, I read really like thousands and thousands of wills. We also had a 24-hour-a-day customer service line that was staffed between me and my co-founder. That was like this little yellow like Nokia banana phone. And it would be, out with friends at 2:00 in the morning, and then just like having a good time. The phone would it's like, hello, it's Dan from Farewill. So we don't do 24-hour customer service anymore. The standards have slipped. But anyway, so this is a guy who collects fossils, and he left his fossil collection to his wife in his will. And he wrote this, which I just find so unbelievably moving. He wrote, "These are millions and millions of years old. I loved being able to hold them and marvel at the age and intricacy of our universe and the short, sharp beauty of our lives. I loved living mine. I love you." It's like,
so nice.
You can't make that stuff up. It's absolutely unbelievable. And then there was a woman who was a painter and left all of her paintings to her partner and wrote, "You always said I never did any art for you. In truth, it was all for you." And it's like, beautiful. That's the kind of stuff that, sure, it's important where your house goes and all your money and whatever else, but it makes people really think about who matters to them in their life, which is a lovely thing to do. And some of these messages, when someone's on the receiving end of it, they're really transformative in terms of your experience of grief and how someone felt about you when they were still alive. So that for me is like, that's the, if I want to get more pretentious about it, that I'd say is where the like actual design magic comes into it, is how you can create the right sort of brand and product experience that takes the blinkers off of just, I'm going through dotting the I's and crossing the T's of this legal document, but makes it, turns it a little bit in that direction of how do I actually deal with the emotional side of it as well. That I'd say is the real like design victory.
Amazing.
In terms of the impact agenda, tell us a bit more about the relationship with the charities and the idea of legacy giving. What is a legacy? How does it differ from other forms of giving? Why is it important? How have you been able to build to £1.1 billion of legacy? What's the interaction with the charity sector that you had in trying to develop that?
It's all used. It's actually 1.25 now. So,
oh wow!
But I wish I had known about legacies when I started. I wish I was like, this is part of my grand vision, because it would make me look more intelligent and sophisticated. But unfortunately, discovered it by accident. So the fascinating thing about legacies, which are gifts in wills, is the £1 in £3 voluntary pounds that goes to the third sector in the UK comes from gifts in wills. It's like a few £billion a year. So it's an enormous part of the third sector. And and actually we're very good at it in the UK compared to other countries. Long history of legacy giving, whether it's like the National Trust or anything else that you can think of. And it's partly like tax incentive, actually. So if you leave 10% of your estate to charity, you get a reduction in the effective inheritance tax rate from 40% down to 36%. So it can actually just like net out as it makes sense. But it's also just we're a kind of fun-loving, charitable nation. And the really interesting thing is that when we started, the problem for most charities is how do you drive this stuff? And it's a really difficult marketing job. So basically when we started, there was only one charity in the UK that had an always-on free will writing service offering, which is Cancer Research UK. And they've been very pioneering with it. And as a result, they massively increased their income through legacies. And it's still most years the top legacy income charity of all the charities in the UK. Most other charities would do kind of stewardship events. So you might have a dinner and you invite your kind of people in the right demographic that dinner, and you tell them why legacies matter, and then you kind of maybe give them a pack about it and you hope that they go and do it. And that's always been a really effective part of the third sector. What we were able to do, and we did it with Macmillan first and a campaigning organization called Dignity in Dying, was we built a really slick journey to go from, you could be an email. So you have a supporter base of a couple of million people and you email them and say, would you like to make your will for free? Gifts in wills are a huge part of what enables us to do the fantastic work that we do. And then in that, they get that email. It's a great offer because, saving £100. And it goes straight through to a co-branded landing page on our site. Again, it takes about 10 minutes to go through, but we really specifically designed a section and experimented with that consistently throughout to promote the idea of legacy giving throughout the journey. And we had absolutely incredible results off the back of it. Really high rates of what's called legacy inclusion, which is, the percentage of people who leave a gift to charity, and really high value gifts as well inside those wills. So the problem in the past, if you're the kind of like, director of fundraising, or you're a trustee of a charity, is like, you'd have this marketing activity and you kind of find out if it works 10 years later, where whoever did it isn't still at the charity. What we built was essentially, and we built this whole back-end suite of tools called Spotlight. It's a bit like Google Analytics for legacy fundraising. So you can start a campaign. You can A/B test different messages via voucher codes. You can optimize your creative, you can optimize your targeting, and you can see results within an hour of putting it live. So it's the coolest thing that we've done, I think, is pretty much every charity that we work with, and I think we've got about 350 long-term partners now. I think we've got about 10 of the 15 biggest in the UK as well, is that their budgets have increased monotonically throughout, because they're able to take that information back to their trustees and say, this really works, we should invest in it. It's almost, from a financial perspective, it's funny because it often gets done by the fundraising department, who are broadly mostly doing like regular giving or events, but it moves a bit more like treasury management, in that the average, you tend to get payback within about 2.5 years, because you need to wait for some people to pass away, and you tend to 10x your money over about 5, and the overall ROI when it's fully developed over about 30 years is about 50 or 60 to 1. So So that's a completely different mentality for managing cash versus for a fundraising department. It starts to behave a bit more like a treasury management department. And where we've had really interesting conversations and a lot more investment is where there's a CFO or there's a treasury function inside the charity that are able to say, hold on, I could put this in gilts or bonds or something else, but the return that we could get on legacies is actually 10x higher. And we should invest from that sort of perspective. That's something that I'm increasingly working on. I have to say, most of our charities, it's still part of regular fundraising, which is fantastic.
What is the investment? Is the investment in the free will?
Free wills. Yeah, it's literally, so we charge charities for basically running this kind of 360 legacy solution, which is how you get the pages live, how you do the marketing messaging, how you analyze the results and report them into the organization. And obviously the wills are included in that pricing.
So is the tip for anyone that hasn't got their will yet to go to Farewill via the charity of their choice? Is that the best way to do it?
I would say if there's a charity that you really believe in, check if they work with Farewill. They probably do. If you want to get a free will and you're willing to rip off a charity, then, shame on you.
Dan, has it always been plain sailing? How did you build that trust? How did you build those relationships? How did you build such an effective partnership?
Yeah, that's been really, really interesting and gratifying part of the journey. Because I have to say, charities get a lot of flack, but they're doing really, really hard work. The pay isn't great compared to being in the tech sector at very least. The work is really meaningful, but there's a lot of legacy technology. There are organizational structures that don't necessarily allow you to do work that quickly, but there are fantastic teams and charities all around the UK. And I think the most interesting thing for me was after we did these initial experiments and we could see this just insane return on investment for any pound that was spent in legacies, I felt like I could go to charities and do a sort of very financial presentation about here's the ROI and like mic drop at the end and have people say, where do I sign? Whereas actually, like, charities are complex organizations. They're really complex stakeholders to manage. You need to be appropriately risk averse because their reputations are everything. You need to, really astutely manage governance inside the charity, make sure that the legal side of it is really easy to understand, make sure that it's really easy to implement as well, because there are really varying setups in CRMs and technology. So I think I went from thinking that, the ROI just meant that there would be organizational buy-in to appreciating just the complexity of selling to relatively large and complex organizations. And I think that's probably true of lots of B2B, of kind of like B2B sales, but probably more so in charities where there isn't always just a straightforward, if this hits the EBITDA, it gets done sort of decision-making.
When building Farewill to a team of hundreds of people, one of the challenges I suspect was around hiring people. And so I'm really interested to know a bit more about how you embed mission and purpose within the organization without creating a dysfunctional dynamic within it.
Yeah. That's a really interesting one. And I've got a bunch of friends who run what's probably called like Tech for Good or something like that. And it's dangerous. It's really dangerous because you get people so excited by the mission, and in a way, there can be is the most important metric in the business what we pledge for charity? Or is it the number of customers that we help? And sometimes it can take on a little bit of a life of its own, of detaching from the reality of actually needing to run a profitable business. And especially with VC funding, where it's like, get the money from the magic money tree. And that we went through that period probably like 2018 to 2022, where it was, there was a lot of enthusiasm for consumer businesses and tech for good businesses. But I think it's possible to develop a sort of alternative reality if you're very, very mission focused that is detached from the commercial, like the sort of like fiscal truth of running a business. And I definitely made that mistake of hiring based on mission, hiring missionaries who were willing to just work incredibly hard to grow the charity side of what we're doing, but probably not focusing on the unit economics as much. So I think these things aren't paradoxical. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It has to be how you combine them together. And possibly at periods in the company, we went too far in the direction of missionary, which is fun. It's so exciting. Like, everyone loves it, including me. And it's easy to drink the Kool-Aid and then find that actually you need to restructure the business, which we had to do a couple of times because we just weren't actually making enough profit.
Dan, would you mind sharing a bit about how you came to identify the right talent and how you hired the right people based on all those trials and tribulations?
Yeah. I think it's definitely it's a part of the business that I found most interesting over time, partly because of getting it wrong when I thought I was doing it right, and vice versa sometimes as well. But it's just where the magic happens is finding the right people. And I think it is something that isn't always very well understood how to do it, especially when you're in the early stages of a business. And we had amazing coaching from someone who's part of one of our early VCs, a woman called Michelle Coventry, who's fantastic, and it's one of the top people in the UK. And she really sat down with me and our co-founder and gave us a masterclass over weeks of how to run a great talent function. And the thing is you're doomed if it's the wrong structure. Like, if you have a horrible org structure, you've got the wrong strategy, it doesn't matter who you hire, it's going to be a bit of a mess. But assuming you have that stuff in place, I think I read a lot of job specs that just are boring. They're so boring and they're terribly written. They're not motivating. And if you're trying to reach the absolute top 1% or 5% of people who could possibly do this role, who are likely to be highly paid and in a great role already, and yank them out of their lovely, exciting team who they love already and get them to join yours, like, write a great job spec. Each word of copy that you put into it should be incredibly motivating, thoughtful, clear, specific, easy to understand. And that's, if it's just obvious. If you're hiring senior people inside the business who are going to be responsible for the entire future of the business, then why not put your best foot forward when you're actually writing job specs? And everyone nods their head when you talk about it. And then you look at job descriptions and they're like it's this complete, it's like an afterthought. So we really put a lot of effort into that, and also putting effort into outreach. Like I've really believe for anyone that I was hiring that you just have to do the hard yards. I didn't really delegate it to a talent function. I would crawl through LinkedIn, literally crawl through it for hours and hours and hours on end, and message people one by one. And if someone said, yeah, I'll chat to you, be like, great, let's talk now. Get straight on the phone, talk to them for 10 minutes. And in that initial pitch of the business, I would sell. That's the hardest sales that I would ever do. Raising money from a VC is ultimately you've got someone who gets their 2% and they want to give you the money. But if you're trying to wrench someone out of this fantastic job that they already have where they're getting paid a load of money, you've got to make it sound exciting. And you've got to, really understand what the opportunity is for someone like that in the next stage of their career. Yeah, so you just got to work really hard, basically. And I think that's the key.
I don't know if, Dan, maybe you're a bit of a frustrated poet, but it seems to me that from your sort of interest in the copy of the job description, it also sort of spoke a little bit to your interest in the wording of the wills. And there's something, a bit of a parallel there about like the power of the word to affect change is something that maybe cuts across both.
I totally agree. I'm really lucky to have an absolutely phenomenal creative director who's called Denise Wilton, and will kill me for even mentioning her name, let alone complimenting her. But she is the most incredible copywriter that I've ever met, and has a real appropriate, deserved reverence for good copywriting. And, if you look at it, there's a sludge factor in an organization of just like any poor communication or added words just makes everything more difficult to do. So I think particularly now I'm part of Dignity and there's 4,000 people, getting messages out in the business is like, it's like we were saying about designing the will writing journey and why design matters there. It's like every added word or something that isn't clear that you're trying to proliferate to 4,000 people who've got tough, interesting, busy jobs is just a waste. So I think the thing I like about copywriting is it's like the second step in a process where the first step is you're clarifying what you're thinking in the first place.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I've really enjoyed over time, is that in writing words, whether it's like strategy or decks or job specs, that you actually go through the process of really honing who am I looking for in the first place and why would they want this job? And then the copywriting is sort of the easy bit, but you got to spend a lot of time on it. And I do really enjoy it as well. I find it fun.
Awesome. So Dan, lesson one is write the right sort of job description and spec. Can you give us some of your other top tips for aspiring hirers?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say you do the hard yards, reach out to people on LinkedIn, like literally spend hours. If it isn't a job you've hired before, make sure you speak to a few of the top people who are in that sector and say, can I have 5 minutes of your time? I really want to understand how you think about your job. Because you're probably going to be completely wrong if you're hiring whatever role it is for the first time, like a chief data officer or something, or like a general counsel. What should I even be looking for? So first step is finding out what am I looking for. You'll get different answers, but you kind of piece together your own picture of it. Then what I always ask people for is their entire life story in like 3 minutes at the beginning. And I'll give them mine as well at the start. So I say, give me your entire life story. And they'll say, well, my first job. And I say, no, take me back to the beginning. And you actually see people's kind of like body language change in that setting. This isn't just a routine interview. It's like, I actually really want to understand, who is this person who's in front of me? Because everyone could do a good interview, but it's like, where are they from? Why have they chosen the decisions that they've taken in the past? If they studied something, why did they study something? Why did they work in particular jobs? Because when you understand that, I'm pretty sure I still have a 100% success rate of offering someone a job and them accepting it, because I've actually understood where they've come from and I understand what they want to do next. And I've taken the time to like actually really listen to them about what they might want to do next. So if I'm going to make them a job offer, I can say to them, look, Adam, I know that you care about impact. I know that you've built your own company, and here are the different things that really matter to you as a bloke. And this is why I think this opportunity in front of us next is like the perfect next step for you. And I'd love to do it with you. Instead of just saying, well, we need someone who can punch holes in a piece of paper and you can punch holes in a piece of paper. So like, why don't you come punch some holes with us? Like it's just a very different way of looking for someone who's actually, the right person to join the team.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So talking about what's next, you mentioned Dignity. Tell us about the story of the partnership. How did that come about? What does it mean from an impact perspective in terms of being able to operate more at scale? I suppose that speaks both to the customer relationship, but also to the charities and the legacy piece as well, and maybe something broader about the sort of death industry, and then what's next for you as well, Dan.
Yeah, definitely. So I've known one of the people who recently bought Dignity for about 7 years. So I think he's a really interesting guy, and I've had that relationship for a long time. We've also worked with Dignity since 2020 because the funerals that we do, we work with them for some of the cremation side of things and logistics. So we've got a long-standing partnership with them. An interesting part of working in this like slightly undisrupted field, and a real question mark when we started the business is, well, how fast can you drive change? How fast can you acquire customers? And the truth is, the sector is moving pretty quickly now, and I think Dignity is doing some fantastic things, but it's moved pretty slowly in general. It's quite hard to drive change overnight when you have this kind of generational cadence to how people organize their funerals. So I think there's a question mark over like the kind of threshold velocity of driving change in the business, which from a VC context is like a limiting factor on just like how hard can you grow the top line. And I think we came to realize probably a few years ago that we were off the track of, right, we're just going to triple revenue every year. We probably did that for 5 years in a row, and then we doubled it, and then it was like less than doubling it. And I think we just kind of fell out of the slipstream of, we're going to 10x this and it's going to be worth £1 billion. And I think it's the most important thing to do when you realize that, is to acknowledge it and reorientate, because I've got lots of contemporaries, and I definitely did it for myself for a while, who, you start missing targets and then you pile cost into the business and you're thrashing around trying to grow it. But the failure rate of VC-backed businesses, when you really dive into it, is about 96%. And I'm not just talking about some random person who starts a business. These are like people slogging their guts out with good teams who are well-funded. And the dangerous thing, I think, when you realize that VC thing is not just evergreen and you're not going to IPO, is to sort of ignore the writing on the wall. So together with my board, who I really respect for encouraging me to do this, they were like, right, what is the plan? And if we're not going to float this for £1 billion, what is actually the strategic home for Farewill that makes sense? So we ran that process. I've got lots of good relationships in the sector, and Dignity is basically the largest integrated company in the funeral space. We've got 580 branches around the UK. We've got 46 crematoria. We've got a coffin factory, which is fantastic. And there's just all of these fantastic people all around the UK who are doing this great job day in, day out. But that's also a business that needs a bit of modernization. So there's very bad technology inside it at the moment, and that's all changing currently. They're currently a sort of very funeral specific provider, and it means that we can add on wills and probate to it and create this joined up experience for customers and for people going through a tough time at the end of life, and also keep Farewill as a separate brand. So our office still exists, our team still exists, the brand still exists, And we're speaking to very different customers. Someone who's going into a high street funeral director in East Grinstead. We just refurbished the Chapel and Rice branch there. Looks fantastic for any of your East Grinstead listeners. Thank you to the mayor for coming. But we're getting different customers who are walking through the door to people who want to do a direct cremation, which is what we specialize in at Farewill, which costs less money. You don't have an attended service. So we carry out cremation, bring the ashes back to the family, and they do their own things. But we speak to very different customers in the market. So it makes sense to have two brands. So in all honesty, the major reason for partnership is it makes sense. It just makes a lot of sense. And overall, I think we're able to impact more people through joining forces with Dignity than carrying on as a standalone business.
And Dan, looking ahead, what do you want your personal impact to be on the Dignity side of the business?
Oh, so exciting. Firstly, it's just really exciting to be in a new business, because although running a startup is really exciting, you realize there's this like cyclical nature to some of the problems, and you realize like, oh, I actually saw this idea 2 years ago. We worked on this 2 years ago, and we worked on it 2 years before that and the year before that, and it's just like Groundhog Day. So it's really exciting to see the challenges of a business of that scale. I've never worked in a retail business, before, and that's just really interesting. There's obviously a huge logistical, physical aspect to it. So some of the stuff that I'm most excited to do is, I think it's a really interesting brand challenge, because a lot of Dignity has been built through acquisitions of local independent funeral directors. So it's how do we make the most of phenomenal teams who are based in their local communities and support them, whilst also bringing the best of the standards and the quality that Dignity has as a really heritage British brand. I think that's a really, really interesting creative challenge. How can we also improve the quality of communication across the whole business? That's both internal, how do you get messages out in a business like that, and external. So how good is the website? How good is the copywriting on it? How are we putting that website together? And there's fantastic team working on that. And really, honestly, just everything. There's so much stuff going on there. So the amazing learning experience for me, and the executive team there is really phenomenal, not least the chief exec who joined in June, who I have a huge amount of respect for. It's been very, very exciting to learn from her so far.
From an impact perspective, what is the future of Dignity? What is the change it wants to drive? We talked about that customer centricity, talk about efficiency and improving the sort of quality of the offering. But from in people's well-being, that you talked about at the beginning, about wanting people to understand and engage with death in a most positive way, and from that sort of legacy contribution that you're making, what's the vision in terms of the impact at scale through Dignity?
It's really to build the UK's leading end-of-life business. And I think the motivation behind that, which is really shared from everyone who works in the business, is this is an awful thing to go through. It is provably, on paper, the most stressful thing that you ever experience in your life is the death of a parent, a partner, or a best friend. It beats everything else. Break your leg, going to prison, getting divorced, getting married scores pretty highly. So the purpose of the business is to support people through that incredibly challenging time. And I think the most exciting opportunity for us to do that better is, we do it fantastically already, but it's extending beyond just the funeral into helping people prepare for it in advance with wills and with funeral plans. And then also when someone comes to us for a funeral, helping them with the probate end as well, so that that you have everything in hand from someone that you can really trust, and that the price is right too. There are so many disparate bits of dealing with the process when somebody dies. I remember we had an early angel investor who was an incredibly impressive CEO. The last 2 times that he'd cried had been standing in a bank when one of his parents had died, trying to shut down their accounts. It's an exhausting, overpriced, difficult process to manage. And I think the aspiration from Dignity is not just to be there when someone needs a funeral, but to help people plan ahead so they can have, better send-offs in the first place, and also help to tie up all of the loose ends when someone dies.
Let's end on positivity. So I think one thing I'm really keen to hear is how many people you've helped, right? How many people? So you talked about 1.25 billion. What does that equate to in the numbers of people that have been through your platform, and how many are you expecting to help in the next sort of year or 10?
We probably have about Dignity, we've got 1 million funeral plans. We'll probably do around 80,000 at-need funerals per year, and then 80,000 cremations in the crematorium group. On the will writing side, we write about 45,000 new wills per year. So I think the goal for us, which I find really exciting, is for 1 in 3 people who are going through like an end-of-life experience to be supported by what we're doing, it was pretty significant to get to that sort of market share. And we're probably at about 20% at the moment. So it's a lot of people.
That's amazing.
Well, I've got belief, Dan. I've got belief.
Well, thank you so much. That's fantastic. As long as you've got those referral codes still as well, that'd be fantastic. That'd be even better.
Correct. Well, Dan, look, thank you so much for your time today.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Rafi, great to have Dan on the pod. What are your thoughts?
It's really brilliant to hear from a true entrepreneur and someone that has, is so invested in getting stuff done and getting stuff done quickly, getting stuff done right, reflecting on the process of activation of an idea, which, he learned from his design school in the first place. So I really learned a lot about some of the challenges of leadership and social entrepreneurship and some of the sort of commercial realities of what it takes to scale from that conversation. Obviously, what Dan's achieved in terms of contribution, both from with people helping him in a difficult time, sort of mental health thing. We didn't really talk about mental health too much, but in terms of that supporting structure around challenges to have in their life and stress is awesome. But then the sort of £1.25 billion being channeled to charities through legacies, which, was just ripe for disruption, ripe for improvement. And he's managed to do that in a way that's obviously hugely transformational for the third sector in this country, is a major achievement. It's an incredible achievement. So it's fantastic to sort of hear about that and hear more about it. I suppose, maybe you wouldn't want to share, but I'd love to hear a bit more about some of the challenges around engaging charities and, to refer to that a little bit about like how charities can be quite, risk averse and very sensitive in terms of how they operate. I'd like to hear a bit more about what the characteristics of different kinds of charities are that are more or less ready to take on this kind of tech. And then obviously it's kind of hard for him to say like what the effect of that has been. He's not going to be tracking down the line where the 1.25 million is going, but it's definitely just a really critical part of that sort of charitable philanthropic system that we have as a country. So a lot to sort of unpack and dig into there, Adam. What do you make of it? Obviously, you've known Dan for many years. How have you sort of followed his journey? Where's he got to now compared to when he first met?
So Dan and I were peers going through the same sort of venture experience together, the trials and tribulations, the difficulties, the stresses. So he's definitely helped me through the dark times. And I'd like to think vice versa. What makes him different than other entrepreneurs I'm friendly with in particular is his focus on design thinking as a way of influencing products and people's experience of the product. It was almost as if the perfect person is chose to tackle the perfect problem, because clearly death is something that people find difficult to talk about and think about. And his nature and the way that he approaches problems and the design part of his character obviously makes such a big difference. I was really struck by how he said that 80% of people that write wills now include messages to their family, and how he turned it from being a legal process to being more of an emotional and personal process. And the human kind of consequences of that are really quite high, being able to say goodbye in the right way, things that perhaps you couldn't say in person, I think is just incredibly powerful. And I think you put it right, Rafi, you say sort of more poet or poet come entrepreneur in particular. And just reflecting on the charity side, so speaking from experience, legacy income is almost impossible for charities to predict and anticipate. And so whilst it's I think Dan mentioned it's a third of income, it's very lumpy and very hard to anticipate. So one of the benefits of what Dan does is making it easier to plan and anticipate legacy income too, which is just so powerful and so important. And that's of big benefit to charities like that. So a really fantastic person, driven, puts me to shame in terms of how hard he worked and the level of dedication, but a great conversation.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Adam. Until next time on the About Equation.